The church bells tolled, heavy and mournful, as Elena stood frozen at her father's graveside, her black dress clinging to her like a lie she couldn't shed. She was 32, married to a man she didn't love, and the weight of her father's expectations still pressed down on her, even in death. Then across the crowd she saw her Sarah, the woman who had once set her heart ablaze, standing like a ghost from a life Elena had buried. Elena's breath caught, her pulse hammering as memories flooded back. Stolen kisses in college dorms, whispered promises under starlit skies, and the night she'd walked away from Sarah to please her father. Richard Caldwell, a man of iron will and traditional values, had demanded she marry James, a kind but oblivious lawyer who fit his vision of a perfect daughter. Elena had complied, locking away her truth, pretending not to be the woman who loved women, pretending not to love Sarah. The funeral was a blur of condolences and casseroles, but Sarah's presence was a sharp blade cutting through the fog. She hadn't changed much in 10 years, still that defiant tilt to her chin, those piercing blue eyes that saw through Elena's carefully constructed facade. Sarah, now 30, was a freelance photographer, her life unbound by the expectations that chained Elena. They hadn't spoken since the breakup, since Elena had chosen her father's approval over her heart. Yet here Sarah was, standing by an oak tree at the edge of the cemetery, her leather jacket a stark contrast to the somber suits and dresses. Elena's husband, James, squeezed her hand, mistaking her trembling for grief. "You okay, honey?" he asked, his voice gentle but distant, like a radio tuned to the wrong station. She nodded, her eyes locked on Sarah, who was watching her with an intensity that made Elena's skin burn. As the crowd dispersed, Elena found herself drifting toward Sarah, her legs moving before her mind could catch up. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and fading leaves. Sarah didn't smile, but her gaze softened, and Elena felt the years collapse between them. "You came," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's lips twitched, a half-smile laced with pain. "I had to. For you. For him." She paused, her eyes searching Elena's. "I'm sorry about your dad." Elena swallowed, the words sticking in her throat. Her father had been her world, strict, demanding, but loving in his own way. He'd never known about Sarah, never known the daughter he'd raised was living a lie to make him proud. "Thank you," she managed, her voice cracking. They stood in silence, the weight of a decade pressing down. Elena wanted to ask why Sarah was really here, why she hadn't moved on, why she still looked at her like she was the only person in the world. But before she could speak, Sarah reached out, her fingers brushing Elena's wrist, a touch so brief it might have been a mistake, but it sent a jolt through Elena's body. "I never stopped thinking about you," Sarah said, her voice low, raw. "Did you?" Elena's heart stuttered. She wanted to say no, to confess that every night she lay beside James, she dreamed of Sarah's laugh, her touch, her reckless courage. But the ring on her finger felt like a shackle, and her father's voice echoed in her mind. Family. Duty. Respectability. "I can't," Elena whispered, stepping back, her eyes stinging. "I'm married." Sarah's face hardened, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of hope. "You're married, Elena. But are you happy?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, as James called Elena's name from across the cemetery. She turned, her heart splitting, and walked back to her husband, leaving Sarah under the oak tree, a silhouette against the fading light. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. James snored softly beside her, oblivious to the storm raging in her chest. She slipped out of bed and padded to the living room, where her father's old Bible sat on the coffee table, a relic of his unyielding faith. She opened it, not to read, but to feel him, to understand why she'd sacrificed so much for his approval. A photo slipped out, a picture of her at 22, laughing with Sarah at a college bonfire, their arms slung around each other, carefree and in love. Elena's fingers traced Sarah's face in the photo, tears blurring her vision. She'd pretended for so long, but her father's death had cracked something open inside her. The funeral had brought Sarah back into her life, and with her the truth Elena had buried. She wasn't just grieving her father, she was grieving the woman she could have been. The next morning, Elena drove to the park where she and Sarah used to meet, a quiet place with a pond and willow trees. She didn't expect Sarah to be there, but when she saw her sitting on their old bench, camera in hand, snapping photos of the sunrise, Elena's heart leapt. Sarah looked up, her expression unreadable. "Why are you here?" Sarah asked, setting her camera down. Elena sat beside her, the bench cold against her thighs. I don't know, she admitted. I needed to see you. Sarah's eyes softened, but her voice was cautious. You made your choice, Elena. 10 years ago you chose him, your dad, your husband, that life. Why now? Because he's gone, Elena said, her voice breaking. And I'm still here, living a lie. Sarah leaned closer, her breath warm against Elena's cheek. Then stop lying, she whispered. For a moment Elena thought she might kiss her, might let the world fall away and reclaim the love she'd lost. But fear clawed at her, fear of judgment, of losing James, of unraveling the life she'd built. She pulled back, her hands trembling. I need time, Elena said, standing. I'm sorry. Sarah watched her go, her eyes heavy with unspoken words. As Elena drove away, she felt the weight of her wedding ring, the weight of her father's expectations, and the weight of a love she'd never stopped carrying. The funeral had changed everything, but she didn't know if she was brave enough to change with it. The days after the funeral were a haze of routine, but Elena couldn't shake Sarah's question. Are you happy? It echoed in her mind as she cooked dinner for James, as she smiled at his colleagues during a work event, as she stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, searching for the woman she used to be. She was 32, living in a pristine suburban house in Connecticut, with a husband who adored her and a life that looked perfect on paper. But perfection was a cage, and Sarah's reappearance was the key threatening to unlock it. Elena tried to bury herself in work, managing accounts at a small marketing firm, but her thoughts kept drifting to Sarah. She found herself scrolling through Sarah's photography website late at night, marveling at the vivid landscapes and candid portraits that captured the raw beauty of the world. One photo stopped her cold. A silhouette of two women holding hands against a sunset, their shadows blending into one. The caption read, "For the one I lost." Elena's chest tightened, knowing it was about her. She hadn't meant to call Sarah, but one rainy afternoon, her fingers dialed the number before her mind could stop her. Can we meet? Elena asked, her voice shaking. Sarah didn't hesitate. The park. Tonight. The park was empty when Elena arrived, the rain pattering softly on her umbrella. Sarah was there, leaning against a lamppost, her leather jacket glistening with raindrops. She looked like a memory come to life, and Elena's heart ached with the weight of everything they'd lost. Why did you call? Sarah asked, her voice steady but her eyes searching. Elena lowered her umbrella, letting the rain soak her hair. Because I'm tired of pretending, she said. I'm tired of being someone I'm not. Sarah stepped closer, her breath visible in the cool air. Then who are you, Elena? The woman who loved me, or the woman who left me? The words cut deep, and Elena's eyes filled with tears. I never stopped loving you, she admitted, her voice raw. But I was scared. My dada was everything to me. He wanted me to be normal. Sarah's jaw tightened. Normal, she repeated, the word dripping with disdain. You think what we had wasn't normal? You think love like ours is something to hide? Elena shook her head, rain mixing with her tears. No, but I didn't know how to fight him. I didn't know how to fight for us. Sarah reached out, her fingers grazing Elena's cheek, wiping away a tear. You're fighting now, she said softly. That's a start. They stood there, rain falling around them, the world fading into a blur. Elena wanted to close the distance, to kiss Sarah and let the past decade dissolve, but the weight of her wedding vows held her back. She stepped away, her heart pounding. I'm still married, Elena said, her voice barely audible. I can't just throw it all away. Sarah's eyes darkened, but she nodded. I'm not asking you to, but I'm not going to wait forever, Elena. I've spent 10 years trying to forget you and I couldn't. Don't make me try again. Elena drove home, her mind a storm of guilt and desire. James was waiting, his smile warm as he kissed her forehead. You're soaked, he said, handing her a towel. Rough day. She nodded, unable to meet his eyes. James was a good man, kind, dependable, everything her father had wanted for her. But he wasn't Sarah. He didn't make her heart race or her soul ache. He was safety, and Elena was starting to realize safety wasn't enough. The next week, Elena found a letter among her father's belongings, tucked inside his old Bible. It was addressed to her, written in his meticulous handwriting. Her hands trembled as she opened it, expecting a lecture on duty or faith. Instead, it was a confession. "Elena, my dearest," it began. "I've always wanted the best for you, but I fear I pushed you toward a life that wasn't yours. I saw how you looked at that girl in college, how happy you were. I was afraid for you, for our family, for what I thought was right. If I was wrong, if I hurt you, please forgive me. Live the life that makes you whole." Elena sank to the floor sobbing. Her father had known. He'd seen her truth and, in his final days, regretted forcing her to hide it. The letter was a release, a permission she hadn't known she needed, but it also terrified her. Living her truth meant dismantling her life, her marriage, her reputation, everything she'd built to please him. She met Sarah again, this time at a coffee shop in town. The air was thick with the scent of espresso and unspoken words. Sarah listened as Elena poured out her heart about the letter, her father's regrets, her own fear of change. When she finished, Sarah reached across the table, taking her hand. "You don't have to decide everything now," Sarah said. "But you have to decide something. You can't keep living for him." Elena squeezed Sarah's hand, her heart racing. For the first time, she felt a spark of courage, a glimpse of a life where she could be herself. But courage was fragile, and the path ahead was uncertain. As she left the coffee shop, she knew she was standing at a crossroads, and the choice she made would change everything. Elena's life began to fracture in subtle ways, like cracks spreading across a frozen lake. She went through the motions, cooking dinner, smiling at James, attending church, but every moment felt like a betrayal of the truth her father's letter had unearthed. Sarah was a constant presence in her thoughts, a pull she couldn't ignore, and the more she tried to suppress it, the stronger it grew. She started meeting Sarah in secret, stolen moments that felt like oxygen after years of suffocation. They'd drive to a quiet diner an hour away, where no one knew them, and talk for hours over greasy fries and milkshakes. Sarah told stories of her travels, snapping photos in Paris, hiking in Patagonia, living a life unbound by expectation. Elena hung on every word, envying Sarah's freedom but also falling for her all over again, her laugh, her fierce independence, the way she made Elena feel alive. One night, as they sat in Sarah's beat-up Jeep, parked by a lake under a star-filled sky, Elena let herself be honest. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to leave him. He's a good man, Sarah. He doesn't deserve this." Sarah's eyes were steady, unwavering. "And you don't deserve to live a lie," she said. "You're not just hurting yourself, Elena. You're hurting him too by pretending." The words stung, but they were true. Elena thought of James, his trusting smile, the way he planned their future kids, a bigger house, vacations to the Cape. He deserved someone who loved him fully, not someone whose heart was elsewhere. But leaving meant facing judgment, her church, her friends, the small-town gossip that would brand her as a failure, a sinner. Sarah reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining. "I'm not saying it's easy," she said, "but I'm here. I'll wait for you, Elena, but only if you're ready to fight for yourself." Elena leaned in, her forehead resting against Sarah's. For a moment, the world was just them, the warmth of Sarah's breath, the steady beat of her heart. They kissed, soft and tentative at first, then desperate, like they were making up for a decade apart. It was everything Elena had dreamed of and everything she feared. The next morning, guilt crashed over her like a wave. She stood in her kitchen, staring at the wedding photo on the fridge, her and James, smiling, unaware of the storm to come. She couldn't keep doing this, living in two worlds, torn between duty and desire. She had to choose. That evening, she sat James down in their living room, her hands shaking as she clutched a mug of tea. "We need to talk," she said, her voice barely steady. James's face fell, sensing the weight of her words. "What's wrong, Elena? You've been distant." She took a deep breath, her father's letter burning in her mind. "I haven't been honest with you," she said. "I married you because it was what my dad wanted, what I thought I was supposed to do. But I'm not. I'm not who you think I am." James's brow furrowed, confusion giving way to dread. "What are you saying?" "I'm a lesbian," Elena said, the words spilling out like a confession, heavy and liberating. "I've always known, but I hid it. For my dad, for you, for everyone. But I can't hide anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. James's face crumpled, a mix of hurt and betrayal. Is there someone else? He asked, his voice breaking. Elena hesitated, then nodded. Her name is Sarah. I loved her before we met and I still do. James stood, pacing the room, his hands running through his hair. So what, our marriage was a lie? 5 years, Elena. 5 years, and you're telling me you've been in love with someone else. It wasn't a lie, she said, tears streaming down her face. I cared about you. I still do. But I can't keep pretending to be someone I'm not. He stopped, his eyes searching hers, looking for the woman he thought he knew. What do you want, Elena? A divorce. The word hit like a punch, but she nodded. I think it's the only way. James left the room, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Elena sank onto the couch, sobbing, relief and grief twisting together. She'd taken the first step, but the path ahead was treacherous. She thought of Sarah, of the life they could have, and for the first time hope flickered alongside the fear. The next day Elena moved out, renting a small apartment in town. The gossip spread quickly, whispers at church, curious glances at the grocery store. She felt exposed, raw, but also free, like a weight had been lifted. She called Sarah, her voice steady for the first time in weeks. I told him, she said. I'm done hiding. Sarah's smile was audible through the phone. I'm proud of you, she said. Now what? Elena didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing. She was ready to find out. Elena's new apartment was small, with creaky floors and a view of the neighbor's laundry line, but it felt like hers in a way her old house never had. She hung Sarah's photograph of the two silhouetted women on the wall, a quiet declaration of her truth. At 32 she was starting over, and the freedom was both exhilarating and terrifying. She and Sarah grew closer, their connection deepening with every shared moment. They'd spend evenings cooking together, laughing over burnt pasta, or walking through the park, their hands brushing with a shy intimacy. Sarah was patient, letting Elena set the pace, but there was an urgency in her eyes, a hunger for the life they'd been denied. One night, as they lay on a blanket under the stars, Sarah traced circles on Elena's palm. What do you want, Elena? She asked. Not what your dad wanted, not what James wanted. What do you want? Elena stared at the sky, the question settling into her bones. I want to be with you, she said finally. I want to stop being afraid. Sarah smiled, pulling her close. Then let's make it real. But making it real wasn't easy. The divorce proceedings were a slow, painful unraveling. James was civil but distant, his hurt palpable in every meeting with their lawyers. Elena's friends from church stopped calling, and her mother, still grieving her husband, struggled to understand. Why couldn't you just stay? She asked one tearful night. You had a good life. It wasn't mine, Elena said, her voice firm but kind. I need to live for me now. The hardest part was facing herself. Years of repression had left scars, doubts that whispered she was selfish, sinful, broken. But Sarah was a mirror, reflecting the woman Elena was becoming. Brave, honest, whole. They started planning a future, maybe a house by the coast, maybe a trip to Paris, where Sarah could photograph the Seine and Elena could finally breathe. One afternoon, Elena found a box of her father's things in her apartment, sent by her mother. Inside was a journal she'd never seen, filled with his thoughts from his final months. One entry stopped her heart. I saw Elena's pain even when she hid it. I wanted her to be safe, but I think I made her small. God, forgive me for not letting her shine. Elena clutched the journal, tears falling. Her father hadn't just known, he'd regretted his role in her silence. It was a gift, a final blessing to live her truth. She called Sarah, her voice thick with emotion. I'm ready, she said. For us. For everything. Sarah arrived within the hour, her camera slung over her shoulder. They drove to the coast, to a quiet beach where the waves crashed and the horizon stretched endlessly. Sarah set up her camera, capturing Elena against the sunset, her hair wild, her smile unguarded. You're beautiful, Sarah said, her voice soft with awe. Elena laughed, a sound that felt like freedom. So are you. They kissed, the ocean roaring around them, and for the first time Elena felt whole. The divorce wasn't final, the gossip hadn't faded, but she was done pretending. She was Elena, in love with Sarah, and that was enough. But life wasn't a fairy tale. A week later, James called, his voice strained. I found something, he said. Letters. From your dad. You need to see them. Elena met him at a cafe, her stomach churning. James handed her a stack of envelopes, his expression unreadable. He wrote these before he died, he said. I think he knew more than he let on. The letters were addressed to Elena, written in her father's shaky hand. They spoke of his love, his mistakes, his hope that she'd find happiness. One line stood out. I saw you with Sarah once at the park. You glowed, Elena. I was wrong to take that from you. Elena's hands trembled as she read, her heart breaking and healing all at once. James watched her, his eyes soft with something like understanding. I didn't know, he said. I wish you'd told me. I didn't know how, Elena admitted. I'm sorry, James. For everything. He nodded, a sad smile on his lips. I want you to be happy, Elena. Even if it's not with me. As she left the cafe, the letters clutched to her chest. Elena felt a weight lift. Her father's words, James's forgiveness, they were stepping stones to a life she was finally claiming. She drove to Sarah's apartment, ready to share the letters, ready to build something new. The months that followed were a whirlwind of change. Elena's divorce was finalized, a quiet agreement that left her free but aching for the pain she'd caused James. She and Sarah moved in together, renting a small house with a garden where they planted wildflowers, a symbol of their new beginning. At 32, Elena was learning to live unapologetically, her heart open in ways it hadn't been since college. Sarah's photography career was thriving, and Elena found herself inspired, taking up writing to tell stories of love and resilience. They'd spend evenings on their porch, Sarah editing photos while Elena typed, their laughter mingling with the chirp of crickets. It wasn't perfect, there were arguments, insecurities, moments when Elena's old fears crept in, but it was real, and that was enough. One spring day, Elena organized a memorial for her father, not at the church but at the park where she and Sarah had rekindled their love. She invited her mother, a few friends who'd stuck by her, and James, who came with a quiet grace that moved her. They scattered wildflower seeds in her father's name, a tribute to his growth, his regrets, his love. Sarah stood beside her, their hands clasped, no longer hiding. Elena's mother watched them, her eyes misty but warm. He'd be proud of you, she said, her voice soft, for being brave. Elena nodded, tears falling. She felt her father's presence in the breeze, in the seeds taking root, in the love she'd finally claimed. She looked at Sarah, her anchor, her home, and knew she'd made the right choice. That night, they lay in bed, the moonlight spilling through the window. Sarah traced the lines of Elena's face, her touch gentle but sure. Are you happy? She asked, echoing the question that had started it all. Elena smiled, her heart full. Yes, she said. For the first time, yes. The journey hadn't been easy. Elena had lost friends, faced judgment, and wrestled with guilt. But she'd gained something greater herself. Her father's funeral had been the catalyst, his letters the permission, but it was her own courage that had carried her here, to a life where she could love freely. She thought of the girl she'd been at 22, laughing with Sarah by a bonfire, unafraid of the world. That girl was still inside her, no longer buried, no longer pretending. Elena closed her eyes, Sarah's warmth beside her, and felt a peace she'd never known. The funeral had changed everything, not because it ended a life, but because it gave her the strength to start one. Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe to get notifications about next videos.